Anthony Gair, as I did my research for this case from the beginning, I learned a little bit about Amadou Diallo, the woman we just saw there, Amadou Diallo's mother, and I was impressed by her background, her fortitude, what she was able to accomplish in Guinea, in her life, the difficulties that she was able to overcome. You're the family attorney for the Amadou Diallo family. Is she a remarkable woman?
She is a remarkable woman. She's one of the most remarkable women I've ever had the pleasure to meet. She's thrust into the public eye. She's a private person. She's torn this way and that, and she's handled it with dignity and grace throughout. I had obviously spent a lot of time with her, and myself, I feel very protective of her because she's just an incredible person.
Yeah. She is certainly not happy with the verdict. Her words were metered, and she was calling for peace, but certainly she does not think justice was done. What does she think justice would be? What do you think justice would ultimately be in this case?
Well, justice in this case, now we're left with the Justice Department getting involved, and we fully expect them to do that. But we're in the process of setting up a meeting with the Department of Justice, hopefully with Eric Holder, the second in command to Janet Reno, and hopefully with heads of the various departments in civil rights, and we hope that they will bring civil rights charges against these officers.
There is indeed precedent for that in this city. Francis Lavati, who was an officer here in the Bronx as well, was involved and ultimately killed a resident of the Bronx, and federal charges were brought against him, and he was in fact convicted. But what is needed in order for the feds to get involved in this case? What are they looking at directly, and what do they hope to find that will allow them to bring charges against these officers?
Well, they don't talk to me about it, obviously, and I'll express my concerns to them. There has to be a compelling interest, and I think a compelling interest in this case is the manner of the prosecution. This case was not prosecuted effectively. I don't know even the experience of these lawyers. I don't know when the last case was that they tried, but I sat in that courtroom every day and listened to it, and I was tremendously disappointed by the lack of effective cross-examination. Just to give you one quick example, I don't want to belabor it, but with the officer's testimony, for instance, Officer Carroll, who testified that he thought this was a serial rapist. Why wasn't he asked questions with that? And this is just one small area. Officer Carroll, you say that you thought this was a serial rapist who you know to be armed and dangerous, yet you never alerted your fellow officers about that. True or not true? True. And so, Officer Carroll, you expected these officers, you were going to allow your fellow officers to get out of the car, approach this individual who, for all you know, could be a killer. Yes or no? Yes. I mean, and you could make him this total, because we know it's bootstrapping, it never happened.
Yeah. One of the interesting things about a federal trial, Beth Karras, is that it would allow perhaps some information that was not allowed in this trial, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think if there were a federal trial, which would be grounded in, I think, Section 1983, which is a civil rights violation, there may be more testimony about profiling and what some of the practices of the department are. Is that correct, or am I?
Well, you know, the problem with the federal prosecution, and I think, you know, technically maybe it's there, but it's an uphill battle, is that negligent, reckless behavior, which is what many people seem to agree, if anything, that's what this is, doesn't apply. Right. You're going to have to show some sort of knowing criminal intent on the part of the officers. And it happened so quickly. I know it's a lot of shots, but no one officer fired, you know, more than 16 shots. So I would be surprised if there's a federal indictment. But you're right, that it may be a broader scope in terms of what can come in, if they can get as far as filing charges.
Sure. We are expecting a civil suit in this case, and certainly you would expect Anthony Gair to introduce that type of information about profiling, how the police goes about its business.
That's actually absolutely correct. Let me say one thing about the civil case. I speak to Mrs. Diallo every day. Her main concern is not the civil case. Her main concern is getting the Justice Department involved and have them prosecute on civil rights charges. Actually, it's 18242 of the U.S. Code. And that's her main concern, and all her efforts are directed to that end. That said, absolutely the civil case under 1983 will raise racial profiling. That's going to be one of the causes of action. There's no question there was racial profiling. All you have to do is read Spitzer's report, and I'd be interested to see what Commissioner Safier has to say to that at a deposition.
But see, the question becomes, again, this racial profiling and how it affects police in the community, and how will you use that in a civil suit against these police officers?
Well, under 1983, a cause of action, we can show that they violated his rights, and they violated his rights because he was black. There's no question about it. They didn't stop him because he was a serial rapist or a push-in burglar. Carol, they were driving by, and he said, "I got something over it." What has he got? Got a black man standing there doing nothing. And it was because of race, and the statistics back that up.
But if it were a predominantly white neighborhood and they stop a black man, isn't that a stronger argument? But you have the Bronx that's 89% black. If they're going to stop anyone, chances are it's going to be an African American.
Beth, I've heard that argument quite a bit, and it doesn't hold water if you look at the statistics. Most telling of which is in precincts in which 10%, the blacks and Hispanics make up less than 10% of the precinct population. Stops of blacks and Hispanics make up well over 50% of the total stops. So.
Yeah, but here you're looking at a precinct that is predominantly, I'm just looking at that area. I'm not denying what the stats show, but I'm just saying, won't that be a tough hurdle because of this neighborhood?
I don't think so, because even under New York's standard, which is a little more narrow than Terry versus Ohio, People versus DeBoer, you have to have reasonable suspicion that this particular individual committed a crime, or is going to commit a crime, or has committed a crime, and there's no evidence of that in this case. That's why they bootstrapped with the rapist and nonsense.
But Tony, one of the jurors was quoted as saying that race was not an issue, and we heard some of the jurors talking about how they went about deliberations and what they based their decision on. And again, they said themselves that this case was not about race. So it seems like you may have a difficult time convincing a civil jury of that.
Well, it wasn't about race because race wasn't raised by the prosecution. It sat there like a red herring, and no one ever got into it. It wasn't brought up. For them, sitting there and listening to the evidence presented, race wasn't an issue. That is not going to be the case in a civil rights case brought by the Justice Department, nor in a civil suit, where race will be brought up, these statistics will be brought in, and it's going to be very clear that race was the issue.
Beth, I wonder if, in speaking with the prosecution in this case, they did touch on it to a small degree in their closing argument, talking about how he was prejudged, Amadou Diallo was prejudged, and he was basically doomed from the minute they saw him, skirting around the race issue. But was it a tactical decision, you think, not to deal with race on a larger scale? You
know, the trial judge, Judge Charisi, was very careful to limit the lawyers. One of the defense lawyers in his opening, I think it was Steve Worth, looked to Reverend Sharpton in the audience and said, you know, some people have an agenda in this case, and the judge immediately put him in his place and didn't let that go any further, and he really, I think, helped to keep race out of the case. But the judge made sure it was a diverse jury, because when the defense wanted to knock off a few of the African-American women, the judge said no.
Yeah, he certainly should be commended for that. I want to give you the last word, Anthony Gair. Again, I want to ask you, certainly the Diallo family does not feel that there was justice done here. What would be justice ultimately in your eyes and in their eyes in this case?
Well, justice would be the Justice Department getting involved, bringing a civil rights action against these officers, bringing the statistics in on racial profiling, showing once and for all that that's what was going on here. It's undeniable, and bringing that all out. That would be justice, and in that way, everyone would see that Amadou Diallo had nothing to do with precipitating this incident. That's what galls me most about it, and about the ineffective prosecution, because by bringing in this verdict of acquittal, the jury is in effect saying, yeah, they're believing this story that Mr. Diallo somehow precipitated it, which, as I said before, is nonsense. That will all be brought out in a federal prosecution, and that's what we're hoping for.
Well, Anthony Gair, I want to thank you for joining me this morning. I want to wish you the best of luck as you move forward with all your actions in this case. And Beth Karras, I want to thank you. Oh, you're very welcome. And Beth Karras, I want to thank you for being with me again for all your wonderful work on this trial. As usual, it was stellar stuff. So you'll be around all day talking about this stuff. So, yeah, you know, get your